now available in paperback and e-readers. Isis, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess. The goddess next door takes on the threat of a deadly digital diva driven to destroy the world in this action-packed, all-new Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess featuring a bonus pin-up and the other 2 books in the Cyber Goddess saga at online bookstores everywhere today. The CW has decided to finally cancel Batwoman after 3 terrible seasons. Now, the Batwoman series had been in trouble even in pre-production. Now, your Greg Berlanti and showrunner Caroline Dries made mistakes as related to adapting Batwoman, and the biggest mistake they made was not staying true to the source material. Now, Batwoman had a critically acclaimed 2011 comic book series that most comic fans loved, and they loved it based on the content of the Kate Kane's character, and they didn't really care about the character's sexual orientation. However, your Greg Berlanti and Caroline Dries decided to ignore the 2011 comic book series and decided to create their own adaptation of Batwoman with a heavy focus on identity politics and a heavy focus on social justice. And it was that focus on identity politics and social justice that alienated the core fan base of comic book fans and made it where many comic fans wanted absolutely nothing to do with this show. Now, your Batwoman, this was one of the big problems with it. It wasn't true to the source material, and if a comic book is not true to the source material and an adaptation of it isn't true to the source material, most comic fans will turn against that whole show, and that's what happened here with Batwoman at the CW. Now, as this Batwoman show went on, they then cast actress Ruby Rose to play Kate Kane, and as they had Kate Kane on the show, it wasn't really, again, true to the source material, and they made deviations saying things like Bruce Wayne walked away from Batman, and that was a point that wound up further alienating more comic fans, because most comic fans know that Batman took an oath to protect Gotham City, and that oath is something that most comic fans know is canon to the character, and it would be completely out of character for Bruce Wayne to just abandon Gotham City. Now, this was the same failed premise that was used to launch 2001's Birds of Prey, and when 2001's Birds of Prey made the statement that Batman had abandoned Gotham City, that's when many comic fans on the first episode abandoned Birds of Prey, and that's what led to many comic fans not wanting anything to do with Batwoman. We had Ruby Rose, who was going to try to go out here and put on the Batman costume and then say that it's made better for a woman now that the suit has been modified for her. And that was another thing that alienated a lot of comic fans and led to the book struggling, not the book, the show struggling as related to trying to build an audience. And it made it even worse because in addition to putting your Kate Kane in a costume and having her spout identity politics lines like the costume is better now that it's made for a woman, they also participated in the passive-aggressive racism that was a major staple of Berlanti production shows. So, yes, they included a Luke Fox character, but this Luke Fox character, like many other black characters on Berlanti shows, was a complete beta male wimp, and he was made to appear to be soft, weak, and docile compared to your Kate Kane's character, and these were things that were major turnoffs for viewers, not to mention we had a storyline that just dragged on and on as related to sisters in the first season that made the entire Batwoman series difficult to watch, because in the first season of a superhero show, you really want to keep it fast-paced. You really want to keep it where we're being introduced to different bad guys in Batman's backstory and Batman's history, but your Batwoman didn't do that. We had a meandering storyline, and we had Batman not guarding Gotham City. And this was the beginning of the end for the Batwoman show as related to connecting with viewers, because had they adapted it where they said, "Oh, Batman's too busy on this case," and then Kate goes out here and becomes Batwoman and focuses on cases he can't hasn't have the time to focus on, or the Bat family doesn't have any time to focus on, maybe Batwoman would have survived as a show. Unfortunately, they decided to focus on social justice and identity politics instead of focusing on storytelling based in DC's history and DC's lore. Now, the first season was a complete disaster, and it was so bad that actress Ruby Rose wanted to leave the show, and she wound up leaving the show after its first season. And with Ruby Rose leaving the Batwoman show in the first season, your Greg Berlanti and Caroline Dries did everything in their power to try to keep this show on the air, and they wanted to keep this show on the air basically because they wanted to continue pushing identity politics and not go out here and produce a quality show. And since they had already alienated most of the white male comic fans and most of the white female and white alphabet comic fans, they realized that they did not have a core audience to sell this show to. So what they did was try to sell the show to black viewers by saying they were going to introduce a black Batwoman. Most black comic fans were absolutely insulted by this decision by your Caroline Dries and your Greg Berlanti, and they were insulted because your CW was basically giving them a hand-me-down show from a white actor and a white actress who had walked away from it, and they were basically giving us a hand-me-down hero who was wearing a hand-me-down costume that a white female had farted in. And that's what we got with your Ryan Wilder, who was played by Javicia Leslie. We got a hand-me-down character presented to us as a black superheroine, but this black superheroine was an insult to most black viewers because, one, we were being picked to be number two to salvage a show, and two, we were not being given an original concept or an original story that featured a black woman being represented in a positive light. Basically, they were just giving us a hand-me-down heroine with a hand-me-down story. The entire origin of your Ryan Wilder is an insult to black people, because here we have the story that's filled with stereotypes about a woman who is living in a single mother household and is struggling and is homeless, and she finds a Batwoman costume near her van that she's living in down by the river after it crashes. And after she finds this costume, she decides to become a heroine. That's a real insult to black viewers, because instead of giving us a character with their own origin and their own story, they're basically saying that this hand-me-down heroine finds her costume in the garbage, and when she finds that costume in the garbage in the van down by the river, she decides to go out here and be a hero. That's again an insult to black people, saying that we can't go out here and be a hero for our own reasons. We can't be a hero for our own motivations. We can't have our own stories. No, we've got to go out here and take the leftovers from the white man with some stereotypes cut and pasted onto them. And this again further alienated more viewers as related to Batwoman, because it was just insulting to project this racist stereotype onto black viewers and saying, hey, we're giving you a black hero, but you're giving me something that comes straight out of the garbage. You're giving me leftovers and trash, and then telling me I have to accept leftovers and trash. And that's a real insult when you consider that there are a lot of great black heroines out there, and I myself create a great black heroine in the Isis character, and I also have one in the E-Steam character. So it's insulting to say, oh, you need to take a hand-me-down from DC Comics. when there are already original characters and from creators like myself out here who could put together much more compelling stories. But no, your DC Comics, what they want to do is create a character who isn't even canon to the DC universe, cut and paste them into it, and then think that black audiences are just supposed to accept this character, this leftover that you're going to give me, this scrap that's wearing a hand-me-down costume, and then say that you're promoting so-called diversity, and what you're really doing, again, is passively promoting so-called representation, but aggressively insulting the black audience because you're saying we're not good enough to have our own characters and our own stories. No, we have to take your scraps and your leftovers, and we have to be content with that. But black viewers were not content with that because black viewers did not come out to support this show in its second season, and ratings further dropped on Batwoman, and your ratings on Batwoman started to drop so badly that your Batwoman got lower numbers than many top YouTube channels at the time, such as Black Friday, such as Toxic Tears, such as PewDiePie. There are so many YouTubers who have higher numbers in the ratings as related to the Batwoman show, and what's really sad is the Batwoman show cost $2 to $3 million an episode, I believe, and that's embarrassing when you consider that a YouTuber could go out here and get 500,000 views with next to no money, but a show that costs anywhere from $2 to $3 million an episode can't even get 500,000 viewers in its second season, and the numbers even got worse in the third season. Now, as Batwoman's numbers further declined in the ratings, that's when Caroline Dries started to pull out the gimmicks as related to the Batman lore. And as she pulled out these gimmicks, she went out here and gave us a token diversity Joker, token diversity Poison Ivy, and again, insulting the audience because instead of giving us a Joker who is a canon white male or a Poison Ivy who is a canon white male, white female, I mean, they go out here and give us token diversity versions, talking about they are going to have the black Batwoman fighting the black Joker, having the black woman fight the Asian Poison Ivy, and it was all about identity politics and not about storytelling. And then after that, they give us the big surprise in giving us your Luke Fox, the beta male, as Batwing. And that really didn't give anybody a reason to watch the show because the storytelling was just absolutely terrible as related to Batwoman. When you think of Batwoman, it's absolutely the storytelling was absolutely terrible, and what they were trying to do in an effort to try to get people to watch the show was they were going to bring in Luke Fox and then have Luke Fox be Batwing. Unfortunately, Luke Fox's Batwing didn't have viewers flying to the channel to watch your Batwing. No, instead of viewers watching Batwing, they wound up further not wanting to watch the show, and they were further not interested in watching the show because your Batwoman had a lot of flash, but it had no substance, and it had no substance because your Batwoman really did not focus on the most important thing, and that was staying true to the source material. No, what your Caroline Dries and your Greg Berlanti thought they could do was race swap Batwoman the same way that Patoff and the producers of Catwoman in 2004 thought they could race swap Halle Berry as Patience Phillips. Unfortunately, like Patience Phillips' Catwoman, your Batwoman wound up flopping in the same way because comic fans only want shows and adaptations that are true to the source material, and they are only going to support shows that are true to the source material. And this has been a big problem with many Greg Berlanti shows, and that's why many Greg Berlanti shows wind up struggling, and that's why your Batwoman wound up struggling for 3 years. Now, the CW tried to hang in there with Batwoman over the course of 3 years as they pushed their identity politics on Batwoman, unfortunately, as they were pushing their identity politics with Batwoman, the show was not building any momentum. And it wasn't building any momentum because, one, the show wasn't true to the source material. Two, the characters were flat and one dimensional. They were basically there to represent different identities as related to identity politics. Your Ryan Wilder's character was basically your black woman who was an alphabet character who was replacing a white woman who was an alphabet character, and she had no personality and no voice, and you had no focusing on Batman's rogues gallery or focusing on the psychological aspects of the character, which was a core component of the story. No, what Greg Berlanti and Caroline Dries thought was, oh, we're going to make this Batwoman show. It'll be about identity politics, and people will go out here and see them virtue signaling and then want to go out here and watch this show in order to say that they're going to support whatever group that's represented. Unfortunately, they did not represent the group that they needed to represent, and that group was comic fans. Now, comic fans of all races who didn't mind Batwoman being a lesbian, they didn't care about that at all, and that was shown as related to the sales of the 2011 comic. But the whole thing was the 2011 comic had really great art and great storytelling, and that was not something your Greg Berlanti focused on as related to Batwoman, and that's why many Batwoman fans did not go out here and connect with the show, and that's why the show is no longer on the air. The CW basically tried to give this show as many chances as it could to find an audience, but at this point, the show was costing too much money to remain on the air because there's no reason a network is going to continue spending millions of dollars on a show that gets less views than a YouTube channel. I mean, that's something that no smart TV executive is going to do, especially at a network that is currently on sale. So the CW realized that they could no longer continue to push what many call woke narratives on Batwoman because it was making them go broke, because $3 million an episode on a show that barely gets, now at this point, maybe 200,000 viewers is just not a proportional cost that the network can continue to support as related to a show that has basically no audience at this point, because you reach a point where the costs become too much, and that's what happened here with Batwoman. Batwoman cost $3 million an episode, and the network just can't afford to keep paying those costs on a show that its audience continues to decline, and with the audience continuing to decline on Batwoman, the network just can't afford to sustain the cost of the show. So that's why Batwoman wound up getting canceled, but I would have canceled it at season 1, because at season 1 you were having problems, and when your lead actress leaves the show, you're basically not going to be able to find an audience for the show, because at that point everybody's going to see anybody in that costume the same way they see Coy and Vance Duke on the Dukes of Hazzard, because when people saw Coy and Vance Duke on the Dukes of Hazzard, that was the end of the Dukes of Hazzard at that point. And this is the same thing here. She's basically, again, like Coy and Vance Duke and like Dick Sargent on Bewitched. People saw that, okay, the lead actor has changed, and they also saw that the premise had changed. So Batwoman had already crashed and burned, and nobody was interested in Batwoman at that point. And you'll have some people like Caroline Dries talking about, oh, there are Batwoman fans. Well, how can there be fans if you have less views than a YouTube channel? There aren't any fans for a show. Nobody is watching it. So when I look at Batwoman, this was a major disaster, and sadly, this was a disaster that was allowed to go on, basically because the network wanted to push identity politics. Unfortunately, identity politics could not help them economically, because if the show is not generating revenue, then the show isn't going to be able to stay on the air much longer. As I see it, Batwoman was mercy killed by the CW, and they had to take this show out because this show was taking a lot of money from the network, and it was leading to the netlet struggling. So this was the only course of action to take as related to Batwoman. This cancellation was a mercy killing of a show that was woke and eventually would have. It was one of the reasons why the CW was on its way to going broke. Now, if you want to see me make more comic and superhero related videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, or my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. And if you want to pick up some of my action-packed African-American fantasy fiction on the SJS Direct imprint, like the ISIS series, the E-Steam series, and the John Hay series, and the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, you can find those books on Amazon.com, along with my first comic, E-Steam, No Good Deed, on Amazon.com right now. You can also find many of my other books on Smashwares, the iBookstore, and Google Play. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available. Paperback and Kindle Unlimited. ISIS, the main event. It's carnage inside of a steel cage when the goddess next door steps in the squared circle with the beast from the boss in this action-packed all-new ISIS series adventure. Get ISIS, the main event, paperback and Kindle Unlimited today.